Thank you very much, Dr Mahathir Mohamad, for sparing your time and gracing our conference with your presence. We are deeply honoured to have the opportunity to speak with you and to have your words echo to the millions of viewers around the globe. My name is Alistair Bartholomew. I'm the Regional Director for Beaconhouse in Southeast Asia, and I currently oversee the operations of our schools across Malaysia, Thailand and the Philippines. I bring with me over 40 years of experience in education, where I've held a number of positions in various schools and academic institutions across the globe, including the UK, China, Singapore, Kazakhstan and Malaysia. I first came to your beautiful country in 1994 when my then school, Haileybury, actually was educating the biggest number, I think, of Malaysian government scholars. And so it's my privilege to be here, sir. Thank you very much. Finally, may I just give a quick introduction to your host, who you've met, and interviewer for the day, Kasim Kasuri, our CEO of Beaconhouse School System and the chair of the School of Tomorrow events. Kasim has served in this role since 2005, where he has steadily consolidated Beaconhouse and driven the international development of the brand. Kasim has also served as Vice Chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Pakistan and was appointed a Young Global Leader from 2009 to 2014 by the World Economic Forum. Tun, thank you very much. And over to Kasim.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Alistair. Very kind of you. Dr Mahathir, once again, let me say how truly honored I am to meet you finally, albeit virtually. I've been a very regular visitor to your country since 2003. That's when we first started we first started work on establishing our schools there. First one, of course, opened in 2004. And as I mentioned earlier, I was expected to be in KL to meet with you, but unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, it would have meant that I would have been in quarantine for 2 weeks. Although I considered that possibility just so that I could get the opportunity to meet you, but in the end, unfortunately, it was not possible. I have to say that I've admired you from a distance, like millions of others in my country. And I've often wished that in Pakistan, we had a leader such as yourself. I know, for example, that our own Prime Minister is a great admirer of yours, and I very closely followed your recent visit with Mrs. Mahathir to Pakistan. Dr. Mahathir, if you'll allow me for some of our viewers, because last time we had people tuning in from about 80 different countries. So it's possible that some of them may not be as familiar with your journey as we are. So I just want to, with your permission, say a few words about yourself. Tun Mahathir was the Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia from 1976 to 1981, following which he was Prime Minister from 1981 to 2003, which is for a record, I think, 22 years. And then again from 2018 to just a few months ago in March 2020. During his 5 consecutive terms as Prime Minister, Malaysia experienced a period of rapid modernization and economic growth. In fact, most modern historians credit the present success of Malaysia to the contributions of Tun Mahathir. Tun Mahathir has also always been a bold advocate of development and economic independence of developing countries, particularly those in the Muslim world. He was conferred the title, again for our international viewers, Tun, in 2003, which is I believe, the highest federal award in Malaysia. And it means, according to Google, Grand Commander of the Order of the Defender of the Realm. So once again, Tun Mahathir, truly a great honor. I'm just going to give a very quick preamble again to the interview. You may be wondering why a school organization was so keen to meet you. Now, Beaconhouse has been around since 1975. We've just completed our 45th year. And as such, we've impacted the lives of generations of young people and their family. Well, some of them are not so young any longer, myself included. And our daily decisions and the daily actions that we take continue to shape the future of young people around the world. And I feel that it's particularly important, therefore, that we have the opportunity to speak with leaders like yourselves so that it can help shape our direction for the future. And I think that you will probably agree that this particular unpredictable time with the COVID pandemic is one in which nobody really knows what the future really holds. And I have to confess that some of the questions that I'm going to ask you today were actually framed at the start of the COVID crisis, because we had originally asked your office for an interview for the first virtual SOT, first virtual School of Tomorrow, which was in July of this year. So, Tun Mahathir, without further ado, my first question for you is that, as we all know, you were the Prime Minister of Malaysia till March of this year. And that was also a turning point for the pandemic, because although it started in December, but it's only around March that it started to become a big global concern. Would you say that you're satisfied with the way in which Malaysia and the Malaysian government have dealt with the crisis?
Well, frankly, I'm never satisfied with anything. So I feel that when we examine things in detail, carefully, we will find some other ways of dealing with the problem. And the pandemic is also a problem of that nature. What we need to do is to understand the problem better, look into the gritty and details, and then find out whether there are things we can do despite the limitations imposed by this pandemic.
Thank you, sir. As you, of course, are better aware than I am, Malaysia has once again introduced a CMCO for our international viewers. That's the Conditional Movement Control Order. And what this also means is that schools like ours are shut. I think that the date that we've been given right now is 6th of December. So we're very much hoping that, inshallah, schools will reopen. And of course, that the economy will normalize. Tun Mahathir, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, believes that many countries cannot afford what he calls a complete lockdown because, as he says, more people will die of hunger than the virus. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this in terms of how we balance lives with saving with livelihoods.
Balancing the need to prevent ourselves from getting infected and also to carry on with our usual work. The balance is very difficult to determine because different countries have got different problems. In countries where people tend to work in big masses of people, they come into contact with each other. Obviously, we have to prevent that from happening because infection takes place when you are close to a person who is suffering from the disease. So you have to keep people apart. But in most types of work, we have to be together, quite close together. But in the condition of the pandemic, we need to learn how to work apart from each other and maybe how to stay at home and not do work, which of course means that we may not be able to earn the kind of money we used to earn. But on the other hand, even staying at home may provide you with some other opportunities to make money for yourself. And nowadays, of course, most of the trade and businesses are carried online. So there really is no need for you to go and meet your customer. You can sell things to people who are thousands of miles away simply by advertising on the net and then taking orders through the net and delivering through the normal channels. So there are many things that can be done despite the pandemic.
Thank you. That you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, for countries like Pakistan, which are not quite as developed as Malaysia, that can be a bit of a challenge. Having said that, Pakistan on the whole has done fairly well. I'm wondering if you've at all followed the way in which Pakistan has handled the pandemic.
Well, Pakistan appears to have achieved a kind of balance between the need to protect people and the need for the people to carry on their normal work. But of course, it is affected. Perhaps the way you manage it is much better than some other countries. For example, in some of the Western countries, developed countries, the focus is more on carrying out the usual work to make money for yourself. And as a result, of course, people meet each other, and in the process, many got infected, and even quite a lot have died because of the disease. So each country needs to study carefully the kind of business we do, the kind of work we do, and how we can apply the health measures, the measures to prevent the spread of the disease in the particular situation that we are in.
Yes, absolutely. So in our country, for instance, the government has pioneered this idea, or they believe they have, of smart lockdowns. So instead of locking down the entire country or the entire city, they will sometimes lock down a small community, where they feel that the virus is spreading. So moving on, as you know, we are an education system. So I'd like to ask a couple of questions in that connection. Now, one of the things that we feel these days is that young people, particularly in countries like Malaysia and Pakistan, are inundated by external influences. And this was not so much the case when I was growing up. But these days, when I look at my own children, they're constantly glued to the internet and to digital media and social media. And I feel that in some respects, it's created a little bit of an identity crisis. And this also reminds me somehow of your own policy, which you had adopted while you were the Prime Minister of Malaysia, which was the Look East policy. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that in terms of how youth in developing countries, particularly those in the Muslim world, can benefit from the advances that the West has to offer while also retaining their own sense of identity and dignity.
We are influenced by our environment. We normally, in any community, there is a system of values which influence the way we react to things, the way we work, for example. So when we decided on looking east, it is not about just acquiring knowledge from the eastern countries. It is more about the value system, the work ethics that they have. Obviously, the value system and work ethics influence the performance of the individual or the community or even the country. So it is important for us not only to acquire knowledge, but also to build the kind of character that will contribute towards your success. Quite obviously, if we are laid back, unwilling to work, we cannot perform, achieve success as well as those who work very hard and do not waste time. So these are value systems and that are different between countries and other countries, and of course between the developing countries and the developed countries. What we wanted to do was to learn the Japanese work ethics, which we find has contributed much towards their success.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think this is a challenge that we all need to continue to address. Tun Mahathir, moving on, I'd just like to ask you a little bit about the education system in Malaysia. As I mentioned, we've operated schools there since 2004, and on the whole, it's been a great journey. But I'm going to be honest with you that we've had our fair shares of challenges, particularly with the movement between English and Bahasa as the medium of instruction for important subjects. So I was just wondering if you'd like to tell us a little bit about this and what you feel would be the right balance. This is also indirectly connected to my earlier question.
Well, every nation wishes to increase the identity of that nation. And language is, of course, one of the things that determines the identity of a nation. But while we want to promote the language and make it perhaps a language of learning, we also have a need to acquire current knowledge. And the current knowledge comes to us not in our language, it comes to us in English. There was a time before, of course, when knowledge was in the Greek language and the Latins, and even Indian. But later on, the Arabs learning this language and acquiring the knowledge were able to make Arabic the language of learning. Subsequently, the Europeans learned from the Arabs, and the European languages have now become the language of learning, and especially English. So we need to make use of the language of learning until such time when we have acquired the skills in research and development and in inventing things which would be written out in our language. But until then, we need to make use of other languages if those languages will give us the kind of knowledge that we need. So in Malaysia, what I have tried to do is that the teaching of science and mathematics should be in English, but the other subjects can be taught in the Malay language, because those subjects like geography and history, they don't change very much. But science, as you know, we make discoveries almost every day, and some of these discoveries negates previous theories, previous concepts. So to keep up with the time, to chase after the new knowledge, we have to learn that knowledge in the language in which it is presented. So we have to promote our own language in the kind of knowledge that doesn't change very much, but in terms of learning science and math, we need to use the language where this knowledge is coming to us from.
I think that's a great way of explaining it. This is actually a big debate in Pakistan these days, because the government is looking at the medium of instruction. So we have a system in which in private schools, the medium of instruction is almost exclusively English. But in the public sector, it is Urdu, which is the national language. And that is further complicated by the fact that we have regional languages in each province. And it's a national debate because the government wishes to introduce a uniform curriculum. And one of the salient features of the uniform curriculum is basically making the national language Urdu the medium of instruction. And the arguments that we are giving against that, of course, I believe that it's very important for children to learn their mother tongue. In fact, most educators globally believe that young children learn best in their mother tongue. But the argument that we are giving is that they cannot completely ignore English, because English is no longer the language of England. It is now the language of progress, of technology, of development. And until our own languages catch up, so yes, we need to have a slightly more balanced approach. Thank you. I appreciate your valuable feedback on this. And if I ever run into the Prime Minister, which I may do, or the Education Minister who was at our previous conference, I'm going to pass on your advice. Dr Mahathir, staying within the realm of education, I just want to ask you one other thing. Now, we've had this black swan event, COVID, which we hope does not repeat itself anytime soon. But other than COVID, the future is looking very unclear for a lot of young people, because anybody you speak to says that about 80% of the jobs that exist today will not exist in the future, and similarly 80% of the jobs that exist in the future do not exist today. And as educators, this poses a major challenge for us, in terms of how we prepare young people for a future which is so unknown. So I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on this.
Well, obviously, we are seeing a lot of new technologies being introduced, and these technologies can benefit us if we understand how to make use of these technologies. In education, we find that we are still using the old system of schooling with children in the classes being taught by their teachers. But with this communication capability now, we could have some expert teachers preparing the lessons, and that can be broadcast through the school or you put on tape or disc, and then class teacher would then use that lesson in order to teach the children. And now we can actually communicate with the the teacher who had prepared the lessons to ask questions and to answer questions. So our means of communication now is fantastic. I can be talking to you in Pakistan, I am here, and yet we are talking almost as if we are in the same room. But in teaching in schools, we are still not using this technology. What we need to do is to have the best teachers prepare the best lessons, and the class teacher should only guide the students, because not all teachers are as good as we hope, but some schools may have poor teachers and suffer from it. Some schools may have very good teachers and they benefit from it. But having one source of learning from a teacher who is an expert, then the results will be less affected by the quality of the class teacher. So we need to learn how to make use of this Zoom system, for example, in order to teach lessons in the classes in all the schools in the country.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much. Carrying on from that, Tun Mahathir, I know that you're a prime example of a lifelong learner. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to create lifelong learners at our schools, because the actual knowledge that they learn may or may not be completely relevant 20 years from today. So I was just wondering if you could share some advice with us, because it's easier said than done. How do you think one can, or what actions do you think that we should take in our schools in Malaysia and Pakistan and many other countries to encourage children to be lifelong learners?
Well, children learn better not just by teaching them verbally, but more by doing things. So we need to introduce practical ways of introducing children, school children, to what they have to do. For example, mobile phone is a fantastic broadcasting station as well as a receiver. And in those days, when I was a boy, all these things are housed in huge houses, uh, so that we can broadcast radio messages and all that. But today, that huge house has been reduced to a small thing in your pocket. So it is a fantastic means of communication, and but it can do so many other things that your telephone before could not do. So the important thing is for people to have access to this new gadget and to play around with it, so that they become very familiar that despite there being no printed pages in your telephone, yet you can scroll and see all the writings that you want to see, including reading novels and books and the like. So we have easy access to knowledge. The thing to do is to find out how we can use this ease of communication in order to improve the quality of teaching in our schools.
Absolutely. Taking on from your point on digital devices, I my next question might sound a bit strange, um, but do you think that it's any longer necessary or relevant for children to learn how to write with their hand or read, um, simply because there are audio books and so much on the internet in which everything is read out to you, and writing has almost become like a art form, like calligraphy. So do you think that this is going to be a necessary skill for the future?
Well, we must learn how to read and to write. That we must do. So the primary schools should focus on that so that they acquire the skill to write and to read. But of course, for the rest, they are going to press buttons, lots of buttons, the apps and all that, so that they now learn more because they can read, because some of the messages coming to you would be in written form, but they are coming through your phone or your computer. But at the same time, of course, the amount of information you get is far greater than before. We have nowadays big data, for example, which enables us to understand things much better and even to, well, use in order to benefit our business or for politicians to know what the people are thinking. So knowing that, perhaps they will be much more careful about what they say and what they do and what they promise.
Oh, absolutely. Anything that is, I suppose, in the written form, whether it is handwritten or digitally, is definitely something that becomes a matter of record. But I have to admit that I'm embarrassed to admit that I've almost forgotten how to write with my own hand, because the only thing I do now is I type, or I'm writing messages on my computer. So or my phone. So I wonder how my kids, or others their age, are what how they are going to cope in the future. Or maybe because when I speak to my own children about it and I tell them how terrible their handwriting is, they say to me that, well, it doesn't matter because we're not ever going to be writing anything by hand. But moving on, Tun Mahathir, since we are having this conversation at this very interesting time, I was hoping that I could ask you a couple of questions about some current global developments, which I know would be of great interest to our viewers, so if you're comfortable. So I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on the recent, elections that took place in the United States, in which I think Mr. Trump is still refusing to concede defeat. But I'm asking this question also in the context of our earlier conversation about civilizations and values. And because one thing that it's made me wonder is about the value of democracy. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, in the first place, we welcome the change. I think Mr. Joe Biden would be a much better president of the United States. I hope that he will not continue this very aggressive attitude about making America great at the expense of other people. We have to suffer in order to make America great. But in fact, America cannot become great without us. They have to have something from us before they can achieve anything. So the attitude of Trump was completely wrong. The way he handles problem was completely wrong. Confrontation with other countries is not going to help at all. We live in a world that, we say we have now a borderless world. So we need to react and understand our neighbors, even those which are far from us. But he wants to isolate America and become great by itself. I don't know what satisfaction he gets from that. But we hope that Joe Biden would be different from him. Certainly, we hope that this trade war with China will stop, because it is affecting us as well. So there are many things that Trump did which does not augur well for us. We are looking forward to this new president. On democracy, yes, democracy is a system. Like all system, it works only if you understand the system and you abide by the system. What we see today is an attempt to make certain absolute countries with absolute rulers, either kings or dictators, to become democratic. But the people themselves do not understand how democracy works. No one wants to lose. Everybody wants to win in an election, and that is impossible. What happens is that when they lose in an election, they resort to street demonstrations, strikes and the like, and the government will have to handle that instead of trying to run the government. But of course, people must have good values, must not try to resort to fraud and things like that during election. So an election, democracy can work only if you understand and accept that by merely putting a tick on a square piece of paper, that determines who's going to win and to lose, instead of having to fight each other. So if you accept that, then when you lose, you accept that you have lost and wait for the next election, not take to the streets and disrupt everything. So every race has its own value system. So when the value system are not suitable for democracy, democracy will not work.
I think that's a lesson that many countries can learn. Certainly we can in my country. But I suppose the US has a very peculiar system with this electoral college where you can have one candidate actually gaining more popular vote, as we saw with the 2016 elections, and still not winning. So it is rather bizarre. Thank you. I appreciate your candid views on this. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you is that what advice would you give to the leadership of Muslim countries at a time in which the West still retains a certain dominance, but China, of course, is also rising? And the reason I ask this question is that many Muslim countries are rich in natural resources. We see Malaysia with the palm oil, of course, many of the Gulf countries, even Pakistan is rich in minerals, yet they're not really able to, I would say, assert themselves or perhaps exercise any influence on the global stage. What is it that we could be doing better?
Well, it's not the resources that determines whether you succeed or not. You know, the oil was there all the time in these Arab countries, but until other people came there and brought up the oil, the Arab countries were very poor. They were mainly fishermen and nothing else. But other people with the knowledge has identified the resource, were able to bring up the resource and add value to the resources. Those were the people who will succeed. So to me, the most important thing is your value system. What is your value system? Are you hardworking? Are you honest? And things like that we will determine whether you succeed or not. And here, as Muslims, we know very well that Islam is not just a religion. It is also a way of life. What is the way of life of the Muslims? If you follow the way of life of the Muslim, you will succeed. There are many injunctions in the Quran which teaches you what you should do, what you can do, what you cannot do. But we ignore all that. All we do is we pray, we fast, we give zakat and perform the Hajj. But beyond that, we are not actually practicing Islam as is found in the Quran, for example. So I think that if we adopt the value promoted by Islam, we will succeed. But all of us do not. We, for other reasons, we break the injunctions of Islam as found in the Quran, and that is why we fail.
Fair enough. I think that's I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I wish that people all over the world understood Islam in the way that you've very briefly explained to me. As a follow-up question to this, if we look at, let's say, the more economic realm, I know that you've frequently spoken about the gold standard for countries like, well, countries in the Muslim world or many countries in the developing world to revert to the gold standard instead of the dollar. In fact, my own father was telling me, because he was the foreign minister of Pakistan under President Musharraf, and he was telling me that at a meeting that he had attended, you spoke about the importance of the gold standard, and it's something also that you mentioned in the Future of Asia conference, which was, I think, in Tokyo in 2019. So do you feel that this, if we look at the global, let's say, relevance of developing countries or Muslim countries, this could be part of the answer?
Well, I think Islam provides most of the answers, but of course, those answers must be made suitable for the time that you are doing whatever. So today, for example, in those old days, to perform the Hajj, you probably walk or travel by camel, but now you fly. To say that is not part of the teachings of Islam is wrong. The most important thing is to be there, to go there, not the performance of the... So some people feel that unless they repeat what happened 1,400 years ago, then they are not truly following the teachings of Islam. But they forget the objective of doing whatever it is that is taught in Islam. It's the objective that is important, not the way you achieve that objective. Because the objective is always good, but the way we do things now would be different from the time of the Prophet. We are not diverging or not ignoring the teachings of Islam. We are simply doing things like we used to do in the past, but in a different way. That's all.
Fair enough. Thank you. Dr Mahathir, since Beaconhouse, the host is well, let me rephrase that, since Pakistan is the host country for Beaconhouse and our other big market is Malaysia. So I personally would love to see greater cooperation between Pakistan and Malaysia. And if we look at the Southeast Asian experience, what it's shown is that irrespective of the form of governance, the one thing which has yielded results, as we saw in your 21, 22-year term as Prime Minister, is continuity of policies. And I'm just wondering if there is any advice in this regard that you could give to political leadership. I'm not talking about the present Prime Minister, but generally to the political leadership of Pakistan, because as you know, our journey has been a bit more challenging than Malaysia's.
Well, as I said just now, if we follow the teachings of Islam, you will do well, you will succeed. But what we are doing is just the opposite of what is taught in Islam. For example, you are not allowed to kill. To kill a person is like killing the whole of humanity. But of course, we find people killing each other, killing fellow Muslims. And we have to work hard, we have to be honest, we have to apply repeatedly in the Quran it says, when you judge with justice. All these things are good values. But if a leader wants to develop his country, one of the most important things is to have the right values. If you have the wrong values, you are thinking of money and other things like that, and you forget the injunctions of Islam, you will. But this applies also to non-Muslims, because all the good values of Islam, when practiced by anybody, will give good results. So even non-Muslims must appreciate that we should not cheat, for example. We should be true to our words. These are things that are taught in Islam. There are many, many other examples of these that will definitely result in an administration that is well supported by the people.
Fair enough. I think that's a great response. The sort of context to my question, of course, was that unfortunately what happens in a number of countries is that a new government comes in and they will tend to, so to speak, throw out the baby with the bathwater. So good policies, bad policies, they just start from afresh. So, and I often say to people that if that had, so if I look at Beacon House as an example, Beacon House has been there for 45 years and by the grace of God has done quite well. Unfortunately, on the other hand, the public education system in Pakistan has not. But even in Beacon House, if every 4 or 5 years, all the policies were to change and the leadership were to change and the ideas were to change in terms of how children should be educated, I don't think we would have done particularly well at all. So I think that it is very important, this continuity of policy, whether it is one individual or it is, several, political leaders. Tun Mahathir, before I come to my last couple of questions on the Pakistan angle, I'm sure you're aware that there are a number of Pakistanis who are settled in Malaysia. And I was wondering, and of course, I'm now talking of after the pandemic is over, whenever that happens. Is there a way in which we could somehow encourage more young Pakistanis to perhaps look at opportunities in Malaysia in a way which is mutually beneficial to both countries?
Well, Malaysia has become somewhat of something of a education center. We have a lot of foreign students coming here to study, and certainly there are some Pakistani students here also. This is very good for them because the cost of education in Malaysia is cheap and the universities are recognized worldwide. But on the other hand, when people come to study here, they understand Malaysia, they are probably develop friends in Malaysia. And the benefit to Malaysia is that when we go, our officials go abroad, they often meet people who had studied in Malaysia, and invariably they are very helpful. So more exchanges of students, of young people is necessary in order to bring people together. In Malay, we say, if you do not know, if you do not know a person, then you do not love a person. So they say that you have to know the person in order to love the person. So we should encourage more travel. Of course, now the pandemic is here, we cannot travel, but at other times we should have more groups of people traveling here and looking at the place, staying some few days perhaps to see, and for Malaysians to go to Pakistan and see the way things are in Pakistan, the way you do things and understand the Pakistani people.
Thank you. There was a time when a lot of Malaysians used to come to Pakistan. I think it was perhaps in the maybe I think 50s and 60s and 70s. In fact, a number of members of the royal households and the different sultans, they studied in schools in Pakistan. But this was a very long time ago. But we would definitely encourage and we would love to have more Malaysians visit Pakistan as well. Tun Mahathir, I'll just move on to my last couple of questions. And one very, very important question, which I'm sure that our viewers would love to learn about more, and that is about your own journey. Because you've taken Malaysia from where it was to basically the ranks of a modern nation state. And I'm sure that from the outside, it's very, looks very glamorous, but I'm sure that you faced many challenges and, of course, successes. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your own journey.
Well, I have always been interested in my own country. I feel very much attached to my country, and I used to read a lot about other countries in books and in novels written by British authors, for example. And I had wondered, why is it that they are so far ahead of us? What is holding us back? And I wanted to be like them. So when I became the Prime Minister, I saw an opportunity to improve situation in the country so that we also can stand as tall as the other people from the developed countries. That is the objective. And I think it's a feeling of shame if you fail. So for that, we have to work very hard and to do what is right, not for yourself, but actually for the country and the people. And I spend a lot of time learning about how to handle problems with people. We are a democratic country, and the way to become a leader is to be chosen by the people. For that, we have to be popular. But if you do things that are good for the people, they will choose you. So I spend a lot of time trying to fulfill the needs of the people. That's how I was able to last for 22 years. And then after I stepped down also, they asked me to come back.
Thank you. If I can come back to that question, I don't want to push you, but could you tell us, and I'm sure young people will, because young people look at successful people and they assume that it's something that, had just happened. But could you tell us a little bit about maybe one or two of the big challenges that you faced along the way?
Well, I've had a long time, I've been a long time in politics, more than 70 years. And during that time, of course, I passed through different ages. I was a youth at the time, and I was very, well, I thought that things could be done easily, but later on I found that it's not so easy. You may have good ideas, but you have to sell the ideas. You have to train people, etc. So being a leader for a long time has enabled me to learn about the weaknesses of the system, the need to change, to rearrange things, to copy from others. All these things had to be done if your objective is to serve the people and develop your country. I think that is very important. Once you forget that and you think that the power given to you is for your own use, then you will do the wrong things. But you have to be conscious that you are there because people choose you and you have to serve them. That's all.
Absolutely. Thank you. Um, I have a just related to that one slightly silly question. Um, you're one of the rare few people in the world who might actually have some recollection of the years after the last pandemic, the Spanish flu. Now, I know that it was over by the time you were born, but do you remember any conversations with your parents or with other people in terms of how they dealt with it?
Yes, I remember, not very well, I do remember, but people were, well, as scared as they are today. But only thing is that in those days, people don't travel much, so they don't carry the disease to other countries so
Right.
quickly.
Yes.
So, but this time around, people are moving all the time, and any disease that is infective would be spread throughout the world in a very short space of time. So, in those days, I believe that within 2 years, I think we were able to isolate ourselves and not suffer that much. And I think they did develop some vaccines against the disease.
Of course. Thank you. I think that's a really important distinction, which I don't think I thought about it. The fact that, yeah, people did not really move around or travel as much as they do now. Thank you. I really appreciate that. My last question, and I'm conscious that we only have 2 more minutes with you. Basically, sort of open-ended. I just want to ask you if you would like to share any advice with the young people or their parents who will be listening to this interview.
Yeah. You see, in education, we concentrate on giving information, but we spend little time on developing the character of the students. It is much more important that we build good character together with the information that we pass on to them. Yes, the information will help them in later life, but if their character is bad, then they cannot benefit from the information. We notice that, well, normally you are brought up by your parents and they teach you what is right and what is wrong. But I think schools should have a proper system of imparting good character, good values to the students, because only good values will give good results from the knowledge that you have required.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. And one of the things that we often stress to parents in our schools is that this is a joint responsibility between the parents, the families, and the school. Because often we have parents saying to us, okay, well, it's your job. But it's actually not our job. It's a collective responsibility. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child. Kun Mahathir, thank you very, very much. We're out of time. I want to once again take this opportunity on behalf of Beaconhouse, the students, the teachers, the administrators, and of course the board of directors of Beaconhouse to thank you for giving us this opportunity for this rare conversation. And it's been a great honor. And I hope, inshallah, that one day, if and when I visit KL after the pandemic is over, I have an opportunity to meet you in person. Thank you very much.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Kun Mahathir, this is a book. Sorry, it's a bit heavy. So it is a book on Pakistan's leading artist, Sadiqian. I'm personally a big fan of art, so I hope that you have an opportunity to go through it.
Thank you. Thank you very
Just
much.
a small token of our appreciation. Yeah, Lisa, you better take it quickly. I think it weighs like 6 kg or something.